Welcome to Classical Chats. I'm Tiffany. Before I start this episode, I want to say a big thank you to everyone who has already donated to our current fundraiser. Just a reminder, we have a few weeks left before the end of the fundraiser for the Together with Classical Grants, which aims to support musicians, amateurs, or professionals to help pay for their lessons, for their instruments, or fund their classical music project. This time, we have the support of the Urtext publication for classical music, Schumann. And they will be supporting our fundraiser and also providing some scores to recipients. So I'm very excited about this, and thank you so much for helping to grow Together with Classical. If you would like to help us reach our goal, please consider donating in the link that's in the description, and or also now currently we have the box on YouTube where you can donate directly via YouTube. Thank you. Alright, now to the episode. If you have been watching or listening to our episodes, you know that we've had a lot of musicians, people who actively play instruments, and of course they make up a huge part of classical music, whether they do it professionally or they do it as an amateur on the side. But we've never had a perspective from a music critic. Today we have Ben Finane, who is currently the director of content at Steinway Sons. We met, of course, through my partnership with Steinway, and a few months ago I was on his podcast, Soundboard, which is a podcast on artistry and craftsmanship, so I'll link that below for you in the description if you want to check it out. What was really fascinating, though, after we recorded the episode, we got to talking, and I was fascinated by his background in music journalism and being a music critic. And so I just wanted to invite him to Classical Chats to hear his perspective. What makes a good performance? What makes a good review? And what has changed so far in the past 20 years that he's been working as an editor, as a writer, and as a reviewer. He was a managing editor in the classic arts division of the Playbill magazine. He's had publications in the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, Newark Star-Ledger, just to name a few. And then he founded his own magazine, the award-winning Listen magazine, and then he made his way into Steinway. So we're gonna hear about his journey. Well, hello, Ben. I think this is our first time seeing face to face, maybe.
That's right. When you were on the Soundboard podcast, you were audio only, but same service. So I'm sure we'll have a similarly wonderful experience.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to have you on Classical Chats. You have such an interesting background, and I was looking through your resume just before our chat, and I saw that, of course, I knew that you were working at these amazing publications in the past as an editor, but also on the bottom of your resume, you listed as an amateur pianist and an amateur baritone.
That's right.
I didn't know about that. So then it's a perfect segue into the introduction question, which is, how did your journey with classical music begin?
Okay, great question. And that's a question I ask people, but you've caught me by surprise. I haven't always considered it about myself. I guess I would have to say that it began with taking piano lessons. When I was a kid, I started with violin. I played violin for 2 weeks. And
that's why it's not on your resume.
Yeah, it didn't make the resume cut. The first thing you do when you play a violin is you do this open A. And my ear was good enough to know that this sounded horribly wrong, but I was also powerless to change it. And I think what I loved about the piano is if I play an A on the piano, then the tuning, all of that, it's not up to me. It's just the velocity of how I press that key, how long I hold it. And that was much more pleasing to my ear, so I stuck with piano. I took
Did you have perfect pitch?
No, I don't. Pitch? No, I think I have really good relative pitch. Pieces that I hear a lot, I can kind of hear in my head, and then if I listen to it on record, I find that I'm in the right key. But I think that's more just, you just keep listening until it gets ingrained in there, right? But I started with a Russian piano teacher who was very strict. And I could go from being genius boy to being idiot boy in like the space of 20 minutes. And I switched to an Italian teacher who was a little more chill. But yeah, the piano was definitely my introduction to classical, along with
Mm,
like the William Tell Overture and music from cartoons and and Bugs Bunny
of
and all that
course.
sort of stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, I was playing classical before I was hearing a lot of other music, and I think that helps because that really does become a foundation for you to
Yeah.
pour things into.
Yeah. Did you come from a musical family?
Not really. My father was the musical one of my parents. He played
Same.
saxophone, and
Oh.
his mother was the organist at their church growing up in Texas. I grew up in Tennessee, but neither of them was particularly musical. But my father had a really great eclectic record collection. So I think you were asking me, what was my first intro to classical? But I think my first intro to music was my dad's record collection, which had all sorts of things. There was classical, there was jazz, there was rock, there was blues, there was stand up comedy, and so I enjoyed all of those things early and often, and I think that helped me grow my worldview, which is that while I really love classical, I don't consider classical like the pinnacle of this musical period. Musical pyramid. I see it more as that genius can exist in any genre, whether that's classical or jazz or rock or hip hop or whatever. And I think that helps keep me grounded uh, because I'm not a fan at the end of the day of classical snobs who have no consciousness of the music outside of their genre and of how it fits in, right? Especially in 2021, let's not pretend that Mozart is our contemporary, right? It's great music, but Thelonious Monk also wrote great music, and that's kind of my advocacy.
Yeah, I remember we talked about this and your various interests in other musical genres and trying to bring that into Steinway. But let's go before we touch on that. That's kind of like
Sure.
the most recent milestone. But piano lessons and
Mm.
then baritone singing.
Yeah, I guess I have a good ear. I have a really good ear. It's not the best ear, but I feel that everything I do is somehow ear related, right? Piano, singing, writing, doing podcasts, being an editor, all of that at the end of the day is related to, does this sound right? Does this sound good? How could it sound better? Whether it's words or whether it's music. Um, so yeah, I think that singing was just kind of natural for me. I didn't really do it so much until college when I joined a chamber singing group, and that was a new experience for me, and I really enjoyed that. This idea of a small tight ensemble where there's nowhere to hide and where you really have to know your pitches. Especially I was usually bass one or bass two, so you're kind of grounding everything, and then also that trains your ears so that when you're listening to music you can hear that ground bass, right? Which is in every classical piece, and it's also in every pop piece. What are these changes? If you listen to the root and what's happening with the music, right? So I'm not a great singer, but singing was really important for me to be able to understand how music works, because it's really, I can play a tritone on the piano, right? Just like pushing down those keys. There it is. But if I try to sing one, I really have to know those notes. I have to own those notes, and I have to understand what the pitches are. So it's much easier to play pantonal or atonal music on a piano than it is to sing it, because you don't have to understand the notes when you're playing them on the piano the way you have to understand them when you're singing them, because you're actually creating that sound.
Isn't that interesting though? Because in the very beginning, you start off with the violin and you couldn't control and make that pitch,
That's right.
and then somehow you made your way back to do it exactly that, but with your
I
voice.
did. I think I was a kid, and it was so frustrating to hear that scratchy violin sound and to be unable to fix it. And and you know, as a spoiler, that's kind of what happened with my piano playing. Is I feel like I got to a place where my interpretive powers were well beyond my technical ability, and that led to a similar frustration on my part in saying, okay, you know what, I want to make a contribution to the arts. I am not a great pianist, so I got to find another way to do that.
And so, writing. How did you find
Yeah.
that calling in you?
Yeah, that's yeah. So I started writing about music in my college newspaper, and I had a little column called Ben Finane, Music Man, and it was it was really to encourage correct pronunciation of my last name, but also
Smart.
it gave me an opportunity to like start reviewing albums and reviewing concerts. I didn't really know what I was doing at all, but then when I graduated college, I took some of those clips to people who were working in music journalism, including Steve Smith, Greg Sandow, Bradley Bambarger. These are guys who are still writing and are now my peers. And I would take them these clips, and they would say, "Okay, you know, this is good. This is not so good. You need to do more of this here, more of that there." And then whatever my main job was that I had, I would try to write about music on the side. And that eventually led to freelance work with the Newark Star-Ledger, which was then an enormous newspaper, as well as with the San Francisco Chronicle. So I would occasionally write articles on classical music for those papers. And I would just do that on the side of whatever my day job was. So I would go to work, then I would get on a train from New York and go to Princeton and hear a string quartet and get home and write it up at midnight for the paper the next day. And those were very exciting music journalism days when newspapers still sort of reigned as the place where folks got their news.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this because you were saying that you were bringing your clips to other journalists to
Right.
kind of get their feedback on what's good
Yeah.
and what's bad. So, first question that came to mind was what makes a good music review? And second
Mm.
question that came to mind was, in this day and age, what is a review and what
Hmm.
separates it from comments in
These
a,
okay.
you know?
These are two fantastic questions. Let's start with the first one, which is what makes a good music review. I think initially, when you start writing about music, you get kind of obsessed with this notion of this is good and this is bad. And my job is to figure out if something's good or bad and then explain why. And I don't think that's exactly what you're supposed to do. I think if you are reviewing something, which is different than, say, a feature, but let's say I'm reviewing a concert or I'm reviewing an album, I think what you're looking to do as a critic is to decide, is something convincing? Did the did this project convince me? That's really what you're asking yourself. Not is this good or is it bad, but is it convincing? Right? If you play, I was just at the Chopin competition, which happens in Warsaw every 5 years, and I watched 12 finalists each play either the E minor or the F minor Chopin piano concerto. And when you hear 12 people play the same thing, then you can really get into the details. But what you're really asking yourself is, am I convinced of this interpretation? Is this interpretation convincing? If it is, you have to figure out what is it that the pianist has done, is doing, that makes you believe in what they're saying about the music. And if it isn't convincing, if it falls flat, if you find your mind wandering, you got to figure out why. You have to figure out why it is that the musical ball has been dropped. And I find again and again that, particularly in classical music and these longer form pieces, um, it's all about the through line. There's a line running through each piece, whether it's for piano, whether it's for string quartet, whether it's for an orchestra. And a pianist's job, a soloist's job, any musician's job is to keep that through line, keep the notes spinning, keep things moving forward, so that you're there as both as the artist and as the listener. You're convinced of what's happening. You're along for the ride, and things are moving. So again and again, when I review, which isn't so often now, that's kind of what I'm looking for, is the through line. That doesn't mean you can't paint a lot of great details, but I need the big picture. I need the big picture. And, tempo has a lot to do with that. Like, does your tempo convince me? You can play a Chopin prelude, you can play it very slow, you can play it very fast, and it'll be convincing at both speeds. But it's up to the player to be so convincing that it feels right. You know, when you listen to something like, oh, this is it, this is it, it's because the player has convinced you that this is the tempo.
So how much of it is instinctual and how much of it is, I mean, that I don't mean like a measurement in grams, but how much of it is from your academic studies, if any? Because something that I've been wondering, as the one who would be reviewed, on the other side of this, I don't know, stage audience world, it's yeah, this question of what makes them have a certain opinion about music and what gives their opinion the ground and the value. So I
Yeah,
don't know if you have something to speak to that.
I really do. I think those are great questions to ask as an artist. And unfortunately, I don't think that all reviewers are in the right headspace and with the right training to be doing what they're doing. I I feel that if you're writing about classical music, you better have fluency in a classical instrument. Otherwise, I'm not so sure that I'm interested in what you have to say. I think you have to have been in those trenches and been playing an instrument. I don't care if it's like trombone, violin, piano, percussion, something. I want you to be able to read music. I want you to have played some masterworks. And then going past that, I want you to come into a performance without any preconceived notions in your head. I don't want you
Is
to
that
sit
possible?
down. I think it is possible because I think it's possible to have a familiarity with the work, but then to literally approach that with an open mind. So you can sit down to Parsifal and say, okay, I've seen Parsifal. I know Parsifal. But you can't sit down and say, Parsifal should be like this. This is how that should be. Because then you're measuring the performance that you're about to see against something that you have in your head that may or may not exist, right? Let's remember that what's really cool about classical music is if uh, if we take a Led Zeppelin song, Black Dog, right? That's a rock and roll classic, and Zeppelin recorded it. There is a definitive recording of Black Dog by which all covers can be judged. There is no definitive recording of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. He didn't put it on wax for us. He just gave us the score. And all the score is a tool. It's a tool for other performers to look at and say, okay, these are the ideas. But ultimately, what are we doing? Like, we memorize the score, and then the score becomes a tool for us to perform. It's the same with a script for a play. I can look at the script as for Hamlet by Shakespeare, but Hamlet doesn't exist until it's performed on the stage. I can read through the score of the seventh. I can see how many fortes are put in. I can see what degree of control Beethoven tries to assert or tries to leave to the performer. But ultimately, it's not the Beethoven seventh until I sit down in the concert hall and hear it, or I sit down at my stereo, or I pull it up on Spotify on my phone, whatever. It doesn't exist until it's actually happening. And that is what is so wonderful about the performing arts, is this it's this ephemeral thing that exists only in the moment, and then it's gone. It's gone. It's not there. You can't point to it. It's not a painting on the wall where you can see, okay, the blues and the grays here are coming in, and there's orange in the corner. You can't even point to it. It's there and it's gone. And so that's another thing as a reviewer. You gotta have an open mind. You have to be paying attention. You have to be taking notes. You have to take notes. You cannot let it wash over you and then later try to recall what happened in detail. If something goes well, if something is convincing, if something is less convincing, jot it down and then try to make sense of all that afterward. So I think that's my advice for reviewers out there.
It's very fascinating to hear it from a reviewer, and so I appreciate you taking us along and the process and what makes it good or bad. So then, the second question was, what sets that apart? Especially since you have been writing for, what, 20 years or something like this? You've been in this industry for a while. And so pre-digital, pre-Spotify, pre-social media to now, what kind of changes have you seen both in the reviewing and both the question of what makes it a review and what makes it a comment on social media? If there is a difference, does it matter?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So let's go back to the Newark Star-Ledger, right? Which I think when I was writing for it was the 7th or 8th most read paper in the country. I used to know 9 people at the Newark Star-Ledger, and now I know 1, right? So what happened? We had a shift from print media to online media. So for a while, it was print. Then we had the rise of digital, and there was this kind of uneasy symbiosis where digital and print sort of coexisted. And now I would say that print has fallen about as low as it can go and still survive. So what does that mean as far as what we ultimately get? There are many fine sources of information online, and there are many sources of bad information online. And I think the biggest challenge online is that if I wrote something for the Star-Ledger, it would pass through at least 2, maybe 3 sets of eyes before it went to print, right? My editor would look at it, a copy editor would look at it, maybe a proofreader would also look at it. Each time that text is being refined, it's being polished. I'm getting questions like, where did you get your information from here? Where did this number come from? Who's this guy? You mentioned him over here. He doesn't appear in the beginning of the story. So we could call these people gatekeepers. That's a loaded term now, but I don't care. I'm going to use it anyway. And gatekeepers ultimately are going to give you a better product than if I, Ben, sit down, open up Facebook, and just type something and then share it to my friends, right? What's going to be the better piece of writing? Is it going to be the thing that I did out of my head as one draft? Or is it going to be something that passes through multiple sets of eyes, each who are focusing in on different things, and all of us trying to contribute to make it better? Well, I think it's the latter. I think it's the print piece that has gone through a bunch of eyeballs. So I think online, I would still venture toward sites and sources that use gatekeepers, and I think that's all I can say about that. I think ultimately it's detrimental that we have the fall of print. I wish that there was better gatekeeping all around on the web, but of course it's very hard to do because, and I don't have to explain this. We all know this. It's enormous, and anyone can post anything at any time. And it's the old quote about a lie can make it halfway around the world before the truth is finished getting out of bed or whatever, right? So we've seen problems that the web has given us in terms of misinformation, and I think that pervades into cultural criticism as well. I think someone with a blog is less valuable than someone who has been edited by 3 other people before the text sees the light of day.
Interesting. So it's really about the process, and the more eyes on it and the more perspectives to really fact check it. And well, I don't mean this in a political sense, but in this scenario, I think that's interesting. That
I think so too. Yeah,
a collective effort.
Yeah, but you know what? Like, look at it from the artist's standpoint too. If you are learning a Beethoven sonata and you just play it and play it and play it and play it, and don't get any feedback from anyone, and you don't go to see a teacher, and you don't go in for coachings, then are you just and you just show up and play a recital? Is it going to be better or worse than if you had taken that piece along the way and gotten feedback? It's the same reasons that orchestras rehearse, right? They don't all just get the score and look at it and learn their parts and then show up and play the performance. Things have to be worked out, and writing is no different from learning a piece of music.
That speaks really deeply at me, because I am kind of doing exactly what you're arguing against, because I'm not bringing what I've been preparing for my concert in Dresden and Kennedy Center. And so some people have been asking, oh, do you go to a teacher to play? And for me, it's more about the self-critic in me
Mm-hmm.
that keeps refining it rather than me bringing it to someone. So I wonder, at what point can you actually be the one, let's say, giving you advice like in the beginning, rather
I
than them asking for more and
Right.
more
I
feedback.
I think, the more you do it, what's Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule, right? Once you've put in your time, like I'm sure that Maurizio Pollini doesn't have to go see anybody before playing his Beethoven. At what point do you get there? I think that's up to each individual performer. But I can tell you this, as a writer, if I have a chance to show someone something before I publish it, I absolutely will. And
Yeah.
I put out a magazine for Steinway once or twice a year, the Steinway Owners Magazine. That doesn't just see my eyes. I definitely send it to a copy editor. I will definitely
Yeah.
send it to someone else because there's going to be things that other people will see, and I think you can always benefit from an extra set of eyes or ears.
Yeah, I mean, I do it with some small part of my audience, and I kind of understand from their perspective. Oh, now they listen to a certain part of Clara Schumann. Recently, someone said differently now, and then that made me think, okay, what is it that I do there, and what can I do better? And so I get some sort of feedback, but not in the academic sense. So that's interesting,
Yeah,
though, and I
yeah.
think it still applies in so many different ways. But let's go back to your career for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Listen magazine, I think it makes sense, having heard your story of how you already said you knew you had a good ear. You can tell
Yeah,
when something is not right, and you're really not in the capacity to make it right. And going into reviewing music, so Listen magazine, you want to tell me a little bit about that? And I think that morphed under Steinway's umbrella at some point. No,
that's right.
that's I
Yeah,
got a yeah.
yeah.
That's what
So
I guessed. I
no,
wasn't
you got
entirely
it.
sure.
Yeah, you got it. So
Yeah.
we started Listen magazine in 2009, and at that time, I was with a company called Archive Music, which sells classical CDs online. And that magazine and that company were eventually sold to Steinway. So Listen was in print for let's see, maybe 7 years, and it's now online at listenmusicculture.com. So yeah, that was a tremendous experience starting a magazine from scratch in 2009, which was the year of like the great magazine die off, and we were starting something new. Um, and it was tremendously exciting, and it was a beautiful magazine, and still is now in its digital incarnation. But I had training before. I had worked as a managing editor at Playbill. I had worked for the 92nd Street Y in New York doing their publications. So it was a great next step for me, and it was fun to put a a new magazine together from soup to nuts, as they say. And it started. We called it Listen Life with Classical Music, and we then expanded our focus from classical for all the reasons I've said earlier. So it became Listen Life with Music and Culture. Um, and yeah, it's been a great experience. We won some awards. We had a lot of great pieces. We had beautiful design, and I'm really glad to have put that together. And I'm pleased about its current digital incarnation at listenmusicculture.com, where I have all the best pieces from past years and some new ones as well.
Yeah, I think I read some really interesting ones and different kinds of interviews, and it's great to see the variety that you have. And actually, I forgot to mention, I have to ask, you did have a lot of experience before you started your own magazine,
Hmm.
and so what kind of experiences did you pick up from working at Playbill, for example,
Hmm.
and also what kind of observations? Again, kind of going back to the question, sorry, going
No.
back to the question of from the printed offline medium to online and any shifts in the music. We've talked about the review aspect and the changes in there, but
Mm-hmm.
for the actual music, having the various experiences from writing, if from Playbill to your own magazine. That was a really long-winded question, but
No, no,
I think you understood.
yeah, I totally get it. So when I was at Playbill, I was responsible for the classic arts playbills. So that means Carnegie Hall, Met Opera, various orchestras and operas throughout the United States. And so that just gave me a good sense of when you look at what everyone's presenting all the time, all year, you can kind of spot trends. And it also gave me an opportunity to speak to people when they wanted to do interviews. And ultimately, that's what pushed me more into interviewing as my favorite medium of journalism, because I don't feel that there are a lot of good interviews out there, especially with musicians, because I think a lot of people come at musicians from what we would call the fanboy perspective, which is like, oh, I really like this guy and I want to ask him about these albums that I like, right? But I'm really interested, and this is why I do the Steinway podcast on artistry and craftsmanship called Soundboard. I'm always interested in how do great artists make great art. And I think there's a dearth of interviews that explore how that magic happens, right? Because we all know, I know, it's not magic. It's a lot of hard work and it's a lot of training. And it's where that training and hard work and inspiration comes together. And I think it's fascinating to talk to great artists and ask them, what's your process like, because it's not the same for any two people. Everyone has a different way of getting at that greatness, and with classical music we have these great works, right? We have, let's stick with Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. There's so many ways to approach it. There's so many different ways in. So there's always a lot of people writing about what makes something great, and this greatness exists uh, not because people have just played it a lot, but because there are ways in, because there's so many cool ideas happening that there's always a new way to explore, right? So that's what I really enjoyed doing, both with Listen Magazine and now with my podcast, is like just talking to people that I admire, people that I respect, people who the world admires and respects for their contributions to music and to the arts, about how it is they do what they do and what insights they have from doing it for like 30, 40 years. It's so great. And all you have to do is ask them. And I feel that so often people don't. If you think about where you see most interviews, maybe it's on a talk show, maybe it's on television, but people are sort of doing this talk show circuit of, I have a new book out and it's about this. Oh, that's really interesting. Go buy his book, right? But what did we learn? We didn't learn anything about the subject or about how he got to uh, what he's talking about now. So that's something that I'm trying to dig into, because I feel like if it's something I'm interested in, I'm sure there are other people that want to hear about it too.
Yeah, no, I remember that this is what we connected on, and I remember talking about this in our episode and about the process and how
Yeah.
that's really missing. And so it's great to hear another perspective on exactly the same observation. And yeah, that's very interesting. So, any I don't know what other questions I have. I think that's been so interesting so far. The only one that really kind of came up, I don't know if you have one to highlight so that
Mm.
in case anyone is interested in listening to Soundboard and
Mm.
seeing more of your work, if there's a particular artist's process that really stood out to you,
Sure.
if you want to highlight anyone.
Yeah, I think three that you might want to check out from the Soundboard podcast is Bill Murray, who we all know and love, but he's more of a man of arts and letters than you'd expect. It's Regina Spektor, who is just a fantastic singer songwriter, and she has a background that is different from you might expect. And then I liked him so much I interviewed him twice. Robert Glasper, who is a Steinway artist and is at the intersection of, let's say, jazz and hip hop. And when I talked to him for the podcast, he was on his way up, and now he's definitely arrived. So I would check out those episodes.
Ah, that's very exciting. Yeah, I'm curious about what it's like to hear from someone going up and then
Yeah.
hearing them at their pinnacle, because I always feel like I'm still like trying to build up, and I wonder how I can be like 10 years from now. So I'll be very interested in that. Well, it's been great.
Interestingly,
Yeah.
sorry, just to say, that's kind of the coolest time to talk to people is when they're on their way up and they're less guarded about things, or when they're really old masters, and they also, at both points, they're not so concerned with how they're being perceived when they talk to you, and so that's when you get some good stuff. Like
Yeah,
I
of
talked
course.
I talked to Pierre Boulez a few years before he died for Listen magazine,
Ah,
and he was just a real pleasure. Whereas 30 years ago, that guy was known for being very aggressive. So it's cool when you can get people looking back and when you can get people looking forward. Sorry, but I
speaking of
interrupted your
looking,
outro. Yeah, go ahead.
actually, no, not an outro. Let's not end this because now you just said looking forward, which
Yeah.
then brought me to think we've talked about, okay, what are the things that you've noticed changing? So what's going forward? How do you see the future of music, the
Mm.
industry, and perhaps even your contributions to the industry?
Mm-hmm. Um, I mean, it's troubling right now, right? We hear that artists are not being fairly compensated for their music. We know this to be true. We know that, if you get a bajillion plays on Spotify, the people who are really going to get paid are the owners of that content. So I guess my best advice to artists is to be really aware of your contracts and be really aware of what you're signing up for. And I think you are a tremendous example of someone who literally does it themselves, right? You
Me?
have, yeah, you have a YouTube channel wherein you take people behind the scenes and you do that by yourself. You literally do it sometimes from under a Steinway, right? Do I have
Yes.
that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's really cool because you own that channel. You own the content you produce. You own these recordings, whether they're on video or elsewhere. And I think that's really important now for artists is to you know understand how to own your material, understand what you're signing. Anytime you sign anything, run that contract past someone who knows, right? We were talking about another set of eyes. If my job is to be an artist, maybe I don't always know how the industry works. Maybe I don't know what a work for hire is versus something that I'm going to get points on later, right? Run that thing by someone else who is a lawyer and who knows. Anytime you have an opportunity to pursue something independently, do it. And I think that's really important for artists now because as the landscape gets more and more diffuse, we talked about it with writing, it's the same with music, right? You can now put things on SoundCloud. You can release your own music on Spotify, but are you going to be better getting a record contract? Can you get a record contract right now? It's really tough. And I think the thing just to sum up, is to really always own what it is you do so that you reap the benefits of whatever happens to that. It's tremendously exciting to have these outlets online for putting your content, but you have to understand how that works, and you have to do it in a way that lets you take advantage of your material and not let others take advantage of you.
So it's really a message of ownership.
Ownership,
Of music.
always. Yeah, own your art. Own your art, artists, as best you can.
That's very. You just keep sparking these additional questions in me, so I apologize for this. But
No,
I
not at
got to
all.
ask, but when you say that, oh, there's so many outlets for music and content,
Mm.
we talked about this. So do you see that as a good thing that there is so much access and so much music interpretations?
It's a double-edged sword, just like it is with music journalism, like we were speaking about, right? So now instead of the major newspapers, and so let's say you have the newspapers and the labels, right? But now, as a musician, I have different platforms. I can put things on YouTube. I can put things on Spotify. I can get something on Apple Music. I can go to SoundCloud. So those things are there, but how do I get people to listen when there's so many voices? I think that's the challenge. And I don't have an answer for that, but I think that this is a question that should always be being asked. Where is this going to go? How am I going to grow it? How am I going to monetize it? It's the same with, let's say I'm a composer. If you're writing a string quartet, that's great. But do you have a quartet to play this? Do you have people who will play it in a hall where there's an audience? Because if not, you're going to write that string quartet and put it in the drawer, right? So you have to think about these things from the beginning. What am I creating? What's the best way to leverage what I'm creating? And how can I grow my audience?
It's very nice that you always go back to the artist perspective of and the creator of the music. But what about from the reviewer's side and the
Mm-hmm.
listener's side? How, especially with your experience having watched the industry change from the editor positions,
Right.
anything to comment on from that other side?
So there's always existed in music journalism this sort of unholy triangle, right? You have editors, you have writers, and you have publicists. Okay. If I am at one point in the triangle, I have to know the other 2 points. So if I'm an editor, I have to know writers that will write for my publication. And I also have to be in touch with publicists who can both suggest writers and suggest topics for things to write about, or grant me access to artists that I want to speak to. If I'm a writer, I have to know editors to pitch stories to, and I also have to know publicists to get ideas to pitch from. If I'm a publicist, I have to know editors of the publications, and I have to know writers to pitch those editors. So we all have to know each other, and we all have to be in constant conversation. This can make for a very sort of closed world, and that's why sometimes you'll see the same artists being written about in this flurry, right, of publications. It's because some
Yeah.
publicist has done their job and gotten in touch
Yeah.
with everyone and sold them, right? So I
Yeah.
think if you are not a publicist, which I am not, it's important to keep an independent mind, right? Don't get sold a story on someone that you don't believe in just because they're available and they're accessible. And you, as an editor or as a writer, should also be on the lookout for great talent and new things and new music that not enough people know about. And if you have something like that, we had a recurring feature in Listen called Unsung, which was, hey, here's a piece of music and you haven't heard it, but you should, and here's why. I think people should always, be looking for the unsung, because, we don't need we don't need more coverage of big pop stars. They're not good anyway, right? Let's find the people that we want to bring to our listeners' attention because we believe in the music they're making and we believe that it is convincing.
Well said. That was, I don't have anything more to add to that. I appreciate your very strong opinions and very direct, succinct. It's maybe it's because you have a background in living in Germany as well.
Yeah, I come strong
I
and
like
direct,
it.
like the Germans.
But it's like it's also what I appreciate, and my best friends are Germans, so it all works well. It's been great. It's more than just like going around and like not
Right.
really being direct. So yeah, it's been great. Well, anything you want to add as the last thing? Anything I should know about? People should know about?
You should immediately subscribe to the Soundboard podcast, which is available on Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, wherever you pod your casts. Soundboard, the Steinway Sons podcast on artistry and craftsmanship.
There you go. Perfect. Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tiffany. I
Okay.
really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was very interesting for me to hear his very honest opinions on music, and I hope you learned something from Ben as well. All the links will be in the description for you if you want to check out his podcast, Soundboard, or want to donate to Together with Classical. Thank you very much for your support. I look forward to the next chat.